The owners make all the money while sitting around doing nothing but being able to bark orders at the people below them who are actually doing the work.
Because
And
you
it's
can't
like, Richard, you know this stuff. Why am I the one explaining this when you could have done this so much easier?
decide it if you don't
I
have.
learned from you. All right.
Marx
Next video: How the Rich Steal from the Poor. Richard Wolff.
was interested in the relationship of people in the process of production.
How people actually relate to the workplace, in that, like, you know, the workers use their labor to produce whatever product or service the company is doing, and then the owners just sort of siphon money off of that and throw a little bit at the workers for their time and labor, which is pretty effed up. Like, it's not cool. The owners make all the money while sitting around doing nothing but being able to bark orders at the people below them who are actually doing the work, which is
Not
pretty
been
not cool.
adequately addressed as an object needing transformation. Now, what does he mean? The answer is exploitation, which he defines mathematically in the following way. Whenever in a society, any society,
Thank goodness.
you organize
Subtitles
people,
are good.
adults, not the children, not the sick, but
However, I mean, capitalism has no problem with exploiting children and the sick and the elderly and, you know, the infirmed, and causing harm to people, making them sick and unhealthy and things like that. So it's actually a surprising distinction that he's making there, in that it does not exist under capitalism. Those people are perfectly likely to be exploited.
healthy adults.
We had to establish child labor laws to prevent capitalist exploitation of children, and, you know, we have workplace safety laws to prevent them from making, you know, and proper, you know, PPE, personal protection equipment, for people who are working dangerous jobs. At least we try to, but, you know, the capitalists do whatever they can to void those regulations, so that, or go around them as best they can, because that way they can take more money from the profit made by their workers, whether they be children, sick, elderly, or just working age healthy adults. Doesn't matter. Or slaves, for that matter. I mean, there's nothing in capitalism against slavery. The definition of capitalism is simply the private ownership of the means of production. There's no distinction for slavery. It's like, that's still totally fine. Like, you can have workers that you don't pay, and those are just slaves.
In the following way: a big block of them, a clear majority, work. That is, they use their brains and their muscles to transform nature. A tree into a chair, a sheep into a woolen sweater, whatever. In every human community, Marx argues, there are the people who do that work, but they always produce more chairs, more sweaters, more hamburgers than they themselves consume, whatever their standard of living. Doesn't have to be low, it could be medium.
If you produce things, particularly in Marx's time, factories were big. I mean, most factories are overseas now, so most people don't even work in factories anymore. It's a lot of service. But again, you know, people are providing a lot more service than they themselves need. It's the argument still applies.
Could be hard.
I mean, if you work at a food place, you know, you produce more food than most people eat, even if it's made to order, you know. A lot of it does end up going to waste.
But they always produce more than they themselves consume. That more, by the way, Marx, when he writes this, uses the German word mehr, M-E-H-R, which is the English equivalent of more. It's the more. That more got badly translated into the word surplus.
Yeah, he's talking about surplus, like labor value and profit, which is where the rich get, you know, which is where the owners get their cut, because the workers, you know, they produce the entire time that they're there. At least that's the idea. That you literally have to sell your labor, as in, when you work, what you're doing is you're selling your time and your labor at a loss to the owner of the business, and it has to be at a loss because otherwise there'd be no profit. So you have to, in order to generate profit, you have to make more money for the company than you're getting out of it.
By the way,
subtitles.
by German and English people doing the translations.
What's the difference between more and surplus? Is there a nuanced?
Yeah, because surplus has a notion of it's discretionary, it's sort of extra.
And I like this because in a socialist society there wouldn't be surplus value because we wouldn't we wouldn't be wasting things. We'd only be making them as needed. So there wouldn't be any, there, because the goal isn't profit under, post-capitalism. The goal is benefiting society. So there's no benefit in society when you create excess stuff. Now, when you create excess stuff under capitalism and you manage to sell it, then you make money off of it. So there's incentive to create the so-called surplus, which is, I believe, what he's explaining here.
He's not making a judgment that it's
It's
extra.
a simple math equation.
Yes, very simple.
One minus
Literally.
the other.
Yes. X minus
Reduce.
Y.
I feel like I like Lex is trying to help here, but I feel like he still doesn't quite understand, unfortunately, which is unfortunate. Yeah, it's unfortunate because Richard Wolff is really good. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's right.
He seems like he's not necessarily explaining things as well as he could here.
X is the total output. Y is the consumption by the producer. Therefore, X minus Y equals S, the surplus. Exactly.
So X is the total amount minus Y equals S, the surplus. But, that doesn't really help the point. It's just that, again, what I had just explained is that, yeah, the surplus wouldn't exist in a post-capitalist society because the point of capitalism is to create that surplus so that the owner can then make money off of that surplus while still paying the laborers the same amount, the workers there, that whatever agreed upon wage is. Whereas in a society without private property, but again, private ownership of the means of production, private meaning for business purposes, for profiting purposes. When we move past that and we just have personal property and public property, then the surplus is kind of unnecessary. I mean, the surplus, if anything, would just go to everybody so that to increase everybody's standard of living. And when it does that, there's no surplus. It's just, we're creating how much we want. And if it's too much, then, say we're making too many sweaters, then it's just wasteful. There's no reason to make these sweaters. Whereas, it's more profitable for the business to make a bunch of extra sweaters, try to sell as many of them as possible, and then if you can't, they generally just burn them because they can make them for such a cheap amount. And in fact, they oftentimes destroy them to create artificial scarcity, even though they can create as many as they need.
Exactly. Now, Marx argues, the minute you understand this, you will ask the following question. Who gets the surplus?
Yeah, again, the surplus goes to the capitalist. It's pretty, because that's what capitalism is about. It's about creating that surplus labor value. But again, I feel like he's doing a bad job of explaining it because the surplus is not necessarily in the amount of stuff that's created. It's the profit that comes back. It's the fact that when you work, I love his he's looking at me like, oh, he looks really worried. But anyway, when you work, you're selling your labor, your time at a loss to the capitalist so that the capitalist owner of the business can make money off of your work, and you're literally selling it for less than it's worth because by definition you have to create that surplus through your labor, which is what he's not explaining and why I'm so confused and why this is not necessarily a great video, which is kind of sad because again, I learned a lot from this guy from his other stuff, from Democracy at Work. So it's kind of sad that he went on this, he had a really great opportunity here and it kind of didn't really work out.
Who gets this extra stuff that is made but not consumed by those who made it? And Marx's answer is, therein lies one of the great shapers of any society. How is that organized? For example, who?
I mean, there's two different forms of surplus too in in industrial society, which is the surplus of the ability to create much more stuff than we need, and for example, sweaters, cars, whatever. like, commodity items, we can create them industrially on an industrial level, and that creates a huge surplus of that amount of stuff. But there's also the surplus value, which comes from the workers doing their job and being paid less than they're making for the company.
Gets it.
Because if they were paid what they made, there'd be no profit, and they would be paid you'd be, business owners make hundreds of times more than the average worker. Generally, honestly, people don't even make a tenth of what they produce, that in terms of their wages. It's awful. I wonder actually how much, if there's an actual statistic. Well, I mean, let's see, wages versus productivity. That's the main thing. That's the chart of, so real wages staying the same, and the productivity goes up like essentially linearly, whereas the wages are staying the same. So every year you're actually making a smaller percentage than was, you're making a smaller percentage of what you create, because again, technology improves productivity, so you're able to produce a lot more for the company, but you still get paid virtually the same. This one only goes up to 15. But what was interesting, especially in 55 to 65, when the government was subsidizing a lot of things, and during the post-war baby boomer years, wages actually were above productivity, which is an interesting thing. And then something happened in the mid 70s, which was Reagan, and boom, wages just stopped growing basically, which is really wild. This one goes up to 13, so it's not even as I wonder if there's one that goes up to 2020. But yeah, it is interesting that there was a point where wages actually were better than productivity for a little bit. But yeah, they have remained stagnant and actually gone down in some cases.
What are they asked, if anything, to do with it in exchange for getting it?
So my question here is, Richard Wolff, why are you not explaining the difference between surplus labor value and the surplus production? Because I think that's getting really confused. And let's see if we look at the comments here. Lex had some chances here to ask some very powerful questions. For example, where does competency fit in this framework? If I do things better, do I get more? If I do more, do I get to decide what I do with the more that I get? And actually, if you had a democratic workplace, for instance, if we brought democracy into the workplace, which is what all that socialism is just democratic ownership of the means of production, basically going from autocratic ownership, meaning that the boss gets to decide everything, to the workers who actually do the work get to decide, and the boss, is voted on. You vote for the boss and everything like that. Then you generally do. If you do better, you probably do get paid more, because everybody would recognize that you're doing more because you would actually be doing more. So and if not, who decide what happens to the more that I earned? And again, it's democratically decided. And it would be easy to move from business to business if you don't like the one there, because again, you have democratic voting power of how the business is run. And so really, I feel like it's more on Wolff here, because he knows the answer to these questions and he's just explaining it so poorly, which is really, really sad to see. The only thing I agree with Wolff on is greater efficiency through technological advances in robotics will always leave the workers redundant, which without a soft result... again, we're literally staving off, full-on, automation, because then workers wouldn't have to work anymore, and literally capitalism does not have an answer to that, because capitalism requires wage labor, because and that's why I said at the beginning, that's why slavery isn't a big deal. So you can quote unquote enslave robots. You don't have to pay them or anything, but they're not really enslaved because they're machines designed to do a task. And they but basically, when human labor becomes redundant, that should be then the result of that labor of the mechanical, the robot, the automated labor should be democratically available to all, not just the people who own the machines and the companies, because then they're just going to charge for it so that they can have a better life than other people, when we all could have a great life, including the people who are the 1%. Like, they could still have their same level of freedom. It's just that everybody else would have it too. I mean, some people will, but like, again, once you get to a certain point of billionaire status, you can't really, like, once you've bought like 5 houses, like, what are you gonna do? You've got 5 mansions, 6 mansions, like, what are you gonna do, buy a 7th? Like, okay, like what? You don't have to work. Once you don't have to work anymore for the rest of your life, there's no reason to exploit people more. In fact, like, if anything, you should then pay your workers more, because you'll have happier workers and you'll get better. But we live in a society of, radical self-interest from, the neoliberal 70s, which really screwed everything over. And then the end of the Cold War, which, again, destroyed everything and made us think that capitalism is the only possibility, which is why we have, comments like this, and why Richard has to explain this stuff. And unfortunately, this is just a very unfortunate. This is just a very bad explanation. There's no way around it, which is just sad. Richard is quite getting to the core. It reminds me of Jordan P. Really, Jordan P. Richard reminds you of Jordan Peterson. Okay, how far can you go into the left before it gets ugly? Let's start with property and determining who decides what is mine and what is yours. Well, again, I can't tell if he's agreeing with Richard here or not, but again, it's like, how far is too far? It's like, I don't know, how much democracy is too much democracy? It seems like it's kind of it's sort of a false premise. I mean, the problem is, the issues with what we view as the left is that most of them were actually not the left. They were the right. They were fascist. I mean, there was a lot of leftist stuff within the USSR, and of course, China had a foundation, I guess, of Marxism and like leftism and post-capitalism. But really, what they've done is they've created state capitalism, where instead of eliminating private property, which is profit property, you've just made the owners move from private citizens who own the businesses to the government now owns all the businesses, which is state capitalism. That's not communism. That's not socialism. Socialism is democratic ownership of the means of production, where the workers own the business and get, or at least, they have democratic say in the business, which is basically the same as owning it. And the owners could be a part of that, and they could have an equal share with the rest of the workers too, and still not have to work. Like, they could still own it and not have to work, but isn't capitalism all about hard work? Like, shouldn't you reward hard work and not reward ownership? Because that's all capitalism rewards, is ownership. It's a lie that it rewards hard work. The hardest working people are the poorest in any example under capitalism. Let's see. Then we have Lex giving us quality and somebody I would have never known about, but also I can immediately hear the confidence in an ability and wants me to know more. And hey, honestly, Ancient Zig, check out Richard Wolff. He's got better stuff, but this is just such a bad video.
What's their social role? For example, here we go now. If you get this, and you get the core of it anyway. And I don't charge much. The workers themselves could get it.
I feel like, oh man, the fact that he made a joke. I mean, it's funny to be like, oh, I've got all this knowledge and like I don't charge much. That's great. But like, dude, you really, I don't know how somebody who's talked about the same stuff for so long should have a refined and easy way of saying it, not it shouldn't be this nebulous, difficult to communicate.
To do not just with who gets it, but more importantly, who gets to decide who gets it.
Well, who?
Yeah, again, deciding surplus. But again, I think that's what he was saying at the beginning is why surplus is a bad word, is because, again, it's like, who gets the surplus? There wouldn't be any surplus under socialism or communism, the difference being that communism, everybody owns everything democratically, whereas socialism, it's just the workers. Under socialism, the workers own the businesses democratically, and under communism, everybody owns everything democratically. Communism being a stateless, classless, moneyless society, which is why the USSR and definitely China do not fit those definitions of those words. They cannot be called communist because they never achieved communism. They, for the most part, didn't really achieve socialism. The USSR did a better job in certain points, for sure. But unfortunately they fell, which is really sad because Russia is hyper-capitalist now, as well as China, again, because they aren't leftists. They are state capitalists. So
Who gets it and who gets to decide what to do?
So who gets it and who gets to decide what to do with it? Again, socialism, the workers, communism, everybody, by democratically deciding how much they make and democratically, and also, again, when during this stuff, this also answers the automation problem because less work is good under socialism because people have to work less but they still make the same amount and their standard of living goes up, whereas under capitalism, the only people who benefit from the automation is the capitalist because they're the ones who get the surplus value and get to decide what to do with it. Whereas under socialism, it's democratically decided among the workers, and communism among the people.
With it.
Right.
Because
and it's like, Richard, you know this stuff. Why am I the one explaining this when you could have done this so much easier?
decide if you don't
I
have
learned from you. I learned it from you, man, Dad. I learned it from you.
disposition over it. So just the logic of the word sequence. It's produced. Marx uses
This is just, it's just like they're just talking about nothing.
word appropriated. In other words, whose property, who gets.
He's just using big words. Like, why are you doing this, Richard? You know, like, you're so good at explaining these things. Why are you not explaining them?
To decide, if you like, what happens. All that property ever meant is who gets to decide and who's excluded.
And again, under capitalism, the people who get to decide are the capital owners, whereas under socialism, it's the workers, and under communism, it's everybody democratically deciding these things because they all own them equally. Or, however they democratically decide to distribute it. But not representatively, but actually democratically, because it would be really easy under a communism society to just give everybody a cell phone and let them vote on the issues that matter to them, and they wouldn't care about the issues that don't. So, yeah, and there'd be no incentive to lie about these issues because, again, you're not doing this for profit, you're doing this for the benefit of everybody. There would be no competing news networks. It would just be, whatever source of news you want, whatever, like, YouTuber or news firm or like, not firm necessarily, but maybe, like, group of people would come together and create networks, like, again, like how we do with, like, YouTube now. We would have, groups of people who do things and, agree and disagree with each other. But again, they would have no incentive to really lie because they would not profit from the lying in any way. Whereas now, it's good to, spin a story in a certain way or, do things because then you get more money. Because the point is the goal of capitalism is to make money, whereas the goal of socialism and communism is to improve society. And improve the standard of living for all.
Definition of communism,
right? And that's by the way, it's not just clean; it's the only one.
So what's
decide and who's excluded?
Yeah,
that's a clean definition of communism, Frank.
Right.
Is deciding who gets it and who's excluded. I mean, that is not a definition of communism. And then Richard's like, it's the only one. It's like, no, dude, that's just how economies work. It's just the government, like, who decides who gets what and who decides that. Like, that's any society. It's the answer to that question that comes out with capitalism, feudalism, or socialism, or communism, or whatever you want. monarchism, fascism combination of a couple of them because they can be somewhat combined. You have social democracy, which is still capitalism, in that the ownership of the means of production is the businesses are still owned by capitalists, but things like housing, healthcare, education, transportation, and things like that are universally accessible to everybody and paid through the taxes of the rich. But that, of course, is not sustainable because eventually those rich people are going to use their wealth to influence, society and, not get taxed as much. Whereas socialism cuts that out entirely because there are no owners, there's only workers, and the workers are the ones who decide where the value is, and there's that ownership class is cut off except for maybe people who are unemployed. But again, the workers want housing and healthcare and education and stuff like that. It makes their lives better and it allows them to work as a job better, and so and find better jobs that suit them and that they can get around, and so they would keep that going, whereas social democracy unfortunately would not be sustainable. It would be better than straight up capitalism, but it's still capitalism. It's not socialism. It's just it's just close to socialism without actually being socialism.
Right.
Which is where the whole socialism is when the government does stuff, but that also comes from the fact that the state capitalist, USSR and China.
Actually, by the way, it's not just clean. It's the only one.
It's actually terribly dirty, and like what definition? It's not just clean. You're not even defining it. This is just this is disappointing.
Can we just linger on the definition of exploitation in that context?
Easy. Becomes very easy then.
I'm guaranteed he's not going to answer it. The answer to exploitation is the fact that you're selling your labor at a loss because the capitalist needs to make profit.
Exploitation exists if and when the surplus that's produced is taken and distributed by people other than those who produced.
That at least he actually answered the question correctly. That's good.
Slaves produce a surplus which the master gets.
That's
Serfs produce.
Oh my God! Where was this 5 minutes ago?
Produce a surplus which the Lord gets. Employees produce a surplus which the employer gets.
Oh,
it's very simple.
It is very simple. It didn't need to take 5 minutes to get to this point, my guy.
These are exploitative.
But that is the correct answer for the question.
Class structures, because one class produces a surplus appropriated,
that class
distributed,
being the workers produce the surplus,
by another group of people,
that is appropriated, meaning taken and distributed by the other group, the class of owners, the bourgeoisie,
not the ones who produced it.
Yes, the owners didn't make it, but they get to take it and distribute it as they please because they own it, quote unquote.
Which creates hostility, enmity, envy, anger,
poverty.
Resentment, and all of the problems
and
you can
literally
lump
generates poverty. Like it creates poverty when there doesn't need to be.
Under the heading class struggle. I use a metaphor, simple metaphorical story. You have two children, let's assume, and you take them to Central Park, a few blocks from here. It's a nice day, and the children are playing, and in comes one of those men with an ice cream truck comes by. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, your children see the ice cream. Daddy, get me an ice cream. So you walk over, you take some money, and you get 2 ice cream cones, and you give them to one of the children.
Like, it would be like if you gave the money and then the ice cream owner got to decide who gets the ice cream. Like, that would make more sense than what he's saying.
One begins to scream.
Because, like, again, who's the worker? The children didn't do any work. Dad or you are the one who paid for the ice cream. Like, the ice cream person did the working. So, like, it unfortunately doesn't even really work. It sounds good, but it doesn't really work. But again, yeah, if the kids went to the ice cream, the ice cream truck, and were like, hey, I'd like some ice cream, and then the ice cream truck got to decide who gets the ice cream, that would be closer to it. But still, again, it's just there's no metaphor. It's just they, like it's like if you and your kids made dinner, but since you own the food and the kids are, up to your decision making, and then you decide who gets the food and you decide you get the food, or you make them cook for you and then you get most of the food and you give them the scraps. That would be a much better metaphor. Would be if you had, the family cooking dinner and you were sitting on the couch while your family makes dinner, and then you get to eat all the food and you give them your scraps. That would be a much better metaphor.
Alan, how? Obviously. What's the issue? And you realize you've just made a terrible mistake. So you order the one you gave the 2 ice cream cones to, give one of those to your sister or your brother or whatever it is. And that's how you solve the problem.
Okay, well, this at least explains why capitalists don't want to give up their power, because yes, if the, one of the kids gets both the ice cream cones, and then instead of taking the ice cream cone and giving, which would be the best way to do it, you tell the kid to give the ice cream to their sibling, and they have the ability to be like, no, actually, I'm going to keep both these ice cream cones. That's where conflict comes in, because, unless you have the power to back up the being like, no, you are going to give that to your sibling because your sibling deserves ice cream too. Yeah.
Until a psychologist comes along and says,
oh my God, this is not a simple metaphor, Richard. Why is there a psychologist? You were talking about ice cream, my guy. Ugh.
You didn't fix it by what you just did. You should never have done that in the first place.
All right. Well, okay. He's talking about the world and how they figured out about leftism, because again, obviously, capitalism wasn't figured out immediately either. It was all it all took some time. Let's see if there's any more worthwhile.
My response, so you understand, all of the efforts to deal with inequality in economic, political, cultural, these are all
This is so sad because he's such a smart guy. I don't know why he's doing it so badly.
Giving the ice cream cone back to the kid. You should never do this in the first place.
They reallocate.
I mean, he does have a point in that. Yeah, it is kind of weird that people are like, you should never have taken away that ice cream that you gave, and because you gave it to the kid. Like if you'd mentioned that you accidentally give it to both of them to the one kid, or you give them to the one kid and you tell the kid to give them to share with the sibling and they never did, and then you force them to do it, and then the whole world shakes their finger at you for doing that. That is kind of a metaphor for socialist stigma and everything. I can see where he's coming from with there, but that's, I don't know, it's I just wish it was better, my man. Come on, you've been working at this for so long. You could tighten it up.
Sources creates bitterness in the populace.
Look at this country is tearing itself.
It does, yeah. I mean, it's a good metaphor for the fact that, yeah, we've already got the ice cream in the wrong hands. It would be like, again, if someone, if a guest, in my example of the, having your family cook for you, and then you oh dang it, my camera seems to have stopped. But anyway, what I'm going to say is that, yeah, if your family cooked for you, you ate all the food, gave them the table scraps, and then somebody came in and was like, no, that's not cool. They cooked. They should get an equal chance of eating, so that, next time around, everybody who cooked, gets an equal share, and maybe even you who didn't cook get an equal share, but at least those who cooked get as much as they need and want. And then the whole world being like, oh, you should have never done that. Oh, no, you're upsetting the natural order of things. And that, I feel like, is a lot more accurate to how things are. Like and subscribe.